guys, Viking Guitar here. Today we're going to cover a powerful tool in home recording, but something you might not have stumbled across if you're just getting started. What we're going to talk about today are envelopes. So we're going to start with a simple envelope to show you what it is they can do. What an envelope does is it allows you to change a setting that's associated with a track or a sound file over time or at a specific point in time instead of changing it universally, which will affect it for the whole song. So this is our normal audio file that we're going to be working with. All right, now let's say that we want this to be louder. Let's say we want it 4 decibels louder. The easiest way to do that is to click on the volume slider and move it over here to 4 decibels, or right click on it and punch in +4, and that'll set it at the new volume. But that's pretty controlling. That's painting with a broad brush. Let's say that we don't want it to be 4 decibels louder for the whole song. Let's say that from this point over to here, we want it to stay at 0 decibels, but starting at the beginning of the 9th measure out through the end, we want it to be +4 decibels. Now, one way to do that, the hard way, would be to cut this track in half, move this down onto a new track, set this new one at 4 decibels, and then it'll play through between them. But that's a lot of work and it's messy because you end up with all these different tracks. Then you got to duplicate all the effects you have, all sorts of stuff. So let's undo all that stuff we just did. So we got one sound file again, unsplit. What we're going to do is use a volume envelope to tell it to stay at 0 decibels up until the beginning of the 9th measure here, and then at that point the volume is going to jump up to 4 decibels louder and finish out. So select the track that you want to work with and go over to this button. Now it says an A on my Reaper just based on my theme, but it might say something different on yours. Regardless, it's going to be just to the left of the effects button. Click on it. This will bring up a list of all envelopes for track 1. Now there's a few buttons up top here that you can use right off the bat. One is Show All Active, which we'll get to later, Hide All, Arm All Visible, and Disarm All. Basically these are just going to control which envelopes are active at the time, but that's not something you need to know about right now. For starters, we're going to look at the options for the actual envelopes we can use. First off, we have Volume, then we have Pan, then we have Pre-Effects Volume and Pre-Effects Pan, which are useful if you have effects on the track. This will give you the option to control the volume and pan before this sound file is routed through those effects, or by using the normal volume and pan, it'll affect the afterwards volume and pan. The last one we have is Mute, which will do just what it says, mute the track. So for right now, we're just going to click on Volume, and as you can see, it creates this new line here with this blue line on it. That is our volume envelope. At the very beginning here, there's a little circle, and that is the first point. That's what tells it that at the start the volume is going to be 0 decibels. Now something interesting here real quick to show you. If you hit V, it'll turn this volume envelope on and off. Now let's go back. Right now you can see that it's set to 0. If you hover your mouse over the point there, or if you click on it, it'll show you envelope volume 0 decibels at 1.1.0 and then a timestamp. That's the measure and timestamp for where this point is. So if we set the volume here to 3, and then turn the volume envelope on, it automatically has it set to 3. This interacts with the volume line here. So if you don't have the volume envelope activated, you can see this thing jump back and forth. Right now it just shows that the volume of the track is +3, and now it shows that the volume of the track is +0, but through the envelope it's being set to +3. Something else to point out here is if you do your whole envelope thing, leave it open, and then go back here and change it so that this is, let's say, 4.52, it's not going to change it on here, but this volume is going to be routed back through the track. So this +3 is going to have an additional +4.52. This is useful if you go through and set a bunch of points to change your volume envelope and then decide that the whole thing needs to be, say, 1 decibel or 2 decibels louder. Instead of having to go through each point and manually change it, just go up here to the track, change the volume how you want it, and it'll affect all these things. So anyway, now that I've confused you, let's get back to what we're doing basically here. What we're going to do is set this to 0. We're going to hit V to pull up our volume envelope, and we're going to change our zoom rate here so we can look at the proper point. Now, like I said, we want it to stay at 0 decibels, and then over at the 9th measure, we want it to suddenly jump up to 4 decibels louder. So we're going to put our cursor at the 9th measure, and I turn snapping on so we're exactly at the 9th measure. I'm going to use my mouse wheel here to zoom in so we're a bit closer. Now at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn snapping off, because using snapping with an envelope is going to change where your points go. So what you're going to want to do is set it up so right at this threshold, in this little space, it goes from 0 on this side of the line to 4 on this side of the line. To do that, select the point where you want your first change point to go and right-click on the blue line, or whatever color it is. Go down to Create New Point. That's going to put an anchor here and make it so that anything we do after that point only changes up to there. Now we're going to go just to the right of the line, right-click again, and select Create New Point. Alternatively, we can shift-click on the line to add points, or alt-click to delete them. Now we're going to zoom in a bit closer just so we have some space between these two. Like I said, this is our first point that's anchoring this 0 decibel, and this is the second one that's going to initiate the change. So click on the second one, make sure it's selected, right-click on it, go to Set Point Value, and in the value position, type +4. As you can see, it automatically reflects that on the envelope timeline. You can also change the specific position here, as well as changing the shape of the line between the 2 points. But we're not going to mess with that now. So click OK. Now when we listen back through it, at this point right here, it jumps 4 louder. And I'm not going to make you listen to the whole thing. Hear that? Pretty cool, huh? So there's a few things that we can do with this volume envelope now that it's set up. If we click on this button right here, we can hide the envelope, which means that it's still active and it's still initiating this volume change. We just don't have to stare at it the whole time. If we click on the track and hit V, we can bring it back up to make it visible. We can also clear the envelope, which is going to delete all of the points in here and basically reset it to 0. Now that's a good thing to do if you set a whole bunch of stuff and decide, you know what, none of it's working and you just want to get rid of it, go and clear it. Also, if we right-click in the timeline here, there's stuff we can do. Like I said, we can create a new point. We can go down to this first point here, right-click on it and go to Set Point Shape to linear, square, slow start end, fast start, or fast end, or Bezier. So let's do a slow start end. You can see it subtly changes the shape of it from a straight line to this slow start and slow end, which has its own uses sometimes. Let's put it back to linear. Also, what we can do is we can select all the points, unselect all the points. We can highlight a region of time and just select those points by select all points in time selection. We can copy them, cut them, delete the ones in the time selection, invert the selected points, reset them all to 0, whole bunch of stuff. Another thing to mention here is that if you find any point here and double click on it, it'll automatically set it back to 0, which is useful sometimes, a lot of the time. So let's leave the volume where it is for now, and let's take a look at some of the other envelopes we can use. Let's turn on a pan envelope. This is going to be the same thing as a volume envelope except controlling the pan. So you can see right now it's at center, and if we turn the pan volume off by hitting P, it's still center. But let's start by moving this guy up to, say, 49% left. And then at the end, we're going to set a point by shift-clicking, right-click on it, go to Set Point Value, and then you're going to go, you can see it says 49% L. Let's change that to 49% R and hit OK. Now it's going to gradually go from the left speaker to the right speaker, and that's going to sound like this. It's also still going to do this volume change. The nice thing about envelopes is that it really frees up your system resources. For example, let's say that we have this guitar line, and let's say later on in the song, we have another guitar line. Whoa, one thing to mention, if you copy and paste it, it'll transfer all the envelope stuff with it. So actually, let's go into this in a minute. Let's undo that. So we've got 2 envelopes going at this point. If we open up the envelope window for the track, we can hide all of them. We can show all of them that are active. So if we have one that's unactive, we can turn it off. And then we can arm or disarm or make visible any of them right through here. So let's disarm the volume one and put show all active, or hide all and show all active. So it shows all of them even though this one isn't armed. Let's arm that one back on. We can also disarm all of them, arm all of them, do all sorts of stuff. Turn them on and off. That bypasses it. And now when we show all active, it doesn't show the pan there. So what we're going to do first off is we're going to clear out all of these. So if we click on this, go to clear envelope, it's going to ask if we're sure we want to delete all points. Click yes. Same thing here. Do you want to delete all of them? Yes. So what I was saying is, let's say that we have a track and we have two different guitar lines on it. Let's say that there are other instruments playing underneath the whole thing, but this is our lead guitar track and we've got a solo at the start and then a solo a bit later on. It's going to sound a little bit boring, possibly, if they're both at the same place sonically in the song. So let's say that we want the panning for the first solo to be 40% left and the second one to be 40% right. Now we can create another track, put this one there, set this guy to 40% left, roughly, and this one to 40% right. But now we've got two tracks that Reaper has to process. It's going to be looking at the effects for each one, dealing with the volume, all sorts of stuff like that, which basically eats up unnecessary resources. It's much easier if we keep them all on one track and we set up a panning envelope to control it for us. So hit P to bring up the pan envelope, or you can go through this and turn on the pan. And the first solo is going to be at 40% left. So we're going to click on this first point that's already there, set the point value. Right now it says center, but type in 40% L, and you can see it moves it down to 40% left. Now, somewhere in the middle here, we're going to create 2 points, one to anchor it, and one to set the new point. We're going to right-click on the new one and go to 40% R for right. Now it's going to play through this one in the left, and then somewhere around here it's going to jump down and switch the panning over to the right while nothing's playing, so it's not audible. And then when this one kicks in, it'll be on the right, and it's all through one track, and it's much easier to do. Something to mention real quick, the reason that you have to put 2 points in the middle here is if you just put one, and you decide, okay, at this point I want it to jump to 40% right, go to the value, change it to 40% right, and you can see you don't have your anchor point, so it's going to gradually transition down to this point. That's not a lot of fun. Or it might be, but it's not what we're going for. So let's clear out this pan envelope here. And yes, we're going to delete this second thing here because it doesn't matter, and we're going to go back and focus on this first part. So as you can see, panning can control a few things here, and that's good. You'll want the volume, the pan, the mute, all that stuff. But it really doesn't end here. In fact, it just begins here. You can use it to control anything, including effects and parameters in effects. So let's say that we want to add an EQ to this guy. So we're going to go down to our REQ, which is in our Cocos folder here. It's the standard built-in EQ VST for Reaper. Double-click it to add it. Now let's say that what we want this to do is just have one band, and we're going to want this to be a band pass. So what it's going to do is it's going to just focus the EQ on a very narrow range of the EQ. So all that's going to come through is this stuff here from, looks like, I don't know, 7,500 up through about 5,000. Now this is going to drastically change the sound of the file here. So I don't know if we're going to want to do this all the time. We could, but we also have the option to change it at some point using an envelope. So let's say that we want this to be on for the first part, and then right around here, right where this second set starts, you can see in the WAV file, we want it to turn off. So what we're going to do is now, if we have an effect on here, if we open the envelope list, you can see we have more stuff. We have a whole set for the REQ Cocos VST, including the first point here, this one. We can control the frequency, which is this guy, the gain, which is this, the Q, which is the bandwidth, as well as bypass it and set the wet. The wet is the percentage of the effect that applies to the track. Generally, this is 100% because if you put it on, you're going to want it to play. But we can also control that if we want to. So for right now, what we're going to want to do is have it cut out at this point. So we're going to set up a bypass. Go in here, click on the bypass envelope, and now we've got it right there. Bypass is kind of unique because it's really an all or nothing sort of thing. You're not going to have a gradient of bypassing it. You're either going to be bypassing it or not. Now right now, since it's turned on, it's set to default of not bypassing it. But what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in, create our 2 points, and then with this one, we're going to raise it up so it does bypass at this point. Now when we listen through to it, just for a segment, you'll hear it with the EQ here, and then it cuts out there. And once again. Pretty cool, huh? Something else we can do is turn off this bypass. And now let's say that we want this to change over time. That's kind of a cool effect where it focuses on the low end and then slowly moves through the mid into the high. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this thing back up. We're going to go to the frequency. And as you can see, if you right click on this first point here and look at the value, it's 1711.8. If we open up the thing here, you can see it's 1711.8. So we're going to start by moving this point down to a low number, like let's say 69.2, just to pick something out of the air. And then at the end, we're going to have it come all the way up here. Now when we listen to it, it's going to sound like this. Pretty neat. So let's clear this guy out. And we're actually going to remove this guy. Now this is all fine and good, but let's say that we're working with something that has a lot more parameters to it. And for example, what we're going to do is we're going to open up an instance of PodFarm. PodFarm is a Line 6 software component that does amp modeling and effects modeling. So we're going to open it, and it takes a moment to load because it's big, and then it brings up the PodFarm window here. So this is not a PodFarm tutorial, so we're not going to go into depth on this, but for right now, all we're really going to do is we're going to set up a few effects through PodFarm. The first of which is going to be a wah pedal. So we're going to select their throaty wah, drag it down here, and let's also say that we're going to add a delay or a reverb. So let's go down here to the King Spring reverb and drag that down. So now, this sound is going through both a wah pedal and a reverb. The problem with the Line 6 product is that we cannot externally control the wah with a hardware component. There's no foot switch pedal that'll control it. All we have is this knob here. So that makes it kind of useless in a lot of ways because the cool thing about a wah is that you can hear it changing, doing the wah sound instead of just setting it at a point. So what we're going to do is through envelopes, we're going to control this wah, and we're going to control the reverb. We're going to set the mix to 0 right now, but turn the dwell up. So it's going to be a really strong reverb sound, but none of it is actually going through at this point. So we're going to do 2 things. First off, we're going to set a mix control on the reverb so that over time there's gradually more and more reverb. And then what we're going to do is we're going to manually control the position of the wah. So once again, let's open up the envelopes window. And oh my God, all of a sudden we have all these different parameters. How are we ever going to find it? Well, we could find it if we really want to search through here, but instead let's open it back up. Let's click on the wah, move it around a bit, and then click on the reverb mix, move it around a bit, and then open this back up. There's a button here that says Show Last Touch FX Parameters Only. If we click on that, the last one touched is verb mix. Great. So we click on that, now we have our reverb mix. Now we're going to move this guy around, go back to the envelope, show last touch FX parameters, and now we have wah position. That's an easy way to not have to sift through this whole list. Basically what that button does is whatever the last control is that you touched, it'll just limit the list to show that. So the first thing is going to be pretty simple. We're going to take our verb mix here. We've got our starting point, but let's say we're going to add a starting point where the sound actually starts, and then over time we're going to gradually increase it. Then what we're going to do is with the wah pedal here, we're going to manually place in all of our different little wah things. Now if this was a real professional thing, we'd want to go through and spend as much time as we could making sure that it, is exactly what we want. But for right now, I'm just going to throw some points down here so you guys get an example of what's going on. So we got a little spike there, a gradual increase, and then let's do a quick little high-low wah thing, and then a high and a gradual decrease, and then a little fluttering right here, and then down. And if you'll notice, if you look at the black waveform up top, where I'm holding the point, you'll see a blue line moving across. That's a good way to make sure you're lined up where you want. So at the last one, we're going to have a gradual wah increase sound. And now with all of it, it's going to sound like this. So with envelopes, the sky's really the limit. It's a good way to control things within the song instead of having to do it all or nothing. And it allows you to add a lot of different dynamic sounds and effects to your mix and your effects and your individual tracks. So in a nutshell, that's what envelopes do. It's a very powerful tool, something you can use to do all sorts of neat stuff with your recordings and make them even more badass than they already are. As always, you can check out my video game covers at www.vikingguitar.com and my original thrash death metal at www.eyeofi.com, and that's EYEOFI. Thanks for watching, hope this helps, and as always, keep the world